Hi, it's Buck again. In 1968, I was stationed in Keflavik, Iceland. I was on an Air Force base, but I was in the Navy, and we had a small contingent there. Now, Iceland is noted for its fishing, some of the best fishing in the world. The trout fishing was especially touted as really being great, and I saw some of those trout that weighed 20, 22 pounds. Never seen one that big before until I went to Iceland. A friend and I decided we were going to go fishing. Now, I went to Iceland with a 1953 ex-military Jeep that I bought for $600. Because I bought this Jeep because I was going to Iceland, and I thought four-wheel drive is what I need, and this is what I'll take up there, okay? Well, it turns out I didn't really need four-wheel drive, but because I had it, I found myself in some trouble one day. My friend and I had decided to go fishing at a lake whose name I can't remember, but it was about 60-some miles from where I was stationed. When we got to the lake, where we could see the lake, it was down off this steep hill, and I could see the lake all around us, but I had to go 15 miles around the lake in order to get to the lake. Well, like I said, I had a Jeep, and Jeeps, four-wheel drive, people with four-wheel drives are known for getting into trouble because they say, I can go anywhere. I saw that lake just down over the hill, might have been 1,000 yards maybe. Why not just go down the hill? Four-wheel drive, shoot, I can do that easy. And it was a steep hill, but it wasn't that steep. So my buddy and I decided we were just going to drop down over the edge of the hill, get there a lot faster. Now, we didn't take any food with us because we thought the fishing's so good, we'll just catch fish and cook and eat them there. We did take coffee. Now I'm going to tell you something. If you've never gone camping, take food. Don't rely on catching fish because they don't always bite the way they're supposed to. Anyway, we started down this hill, and I don't really know how far we went. 100 feet, 100 yards. Could have been either. But all of a sudden, as I'm going downhill, my Jeep just sank in the mud all the way up to the frame. I couldn't believe it. I'm going down a steep hill and I'm stuck in the mud. Well, I've been stuck in mud before. I was raised on a farm, drove tractors, got myself in trouble. I knew how to do it. What I needed was a board. And I would take my jack and I would jack the Jeep up, roll off the Jeep, and just keep doing that until I got out of the mud. So I got my jack, found a place where I could actually fit it under the Jeep and raise the Jeep, started applying pressure. But you know what the problem is? When you're trying to jack anything up and you're in the mud, and the pressure is applied upwards, supposedly to raise your vehicle, that doesn't happen. What does happen is your jack sinks into the mud. Well, that's what was happening to us. And so I realized I need something to put under the jack. I need a board. Well, this is Iceland. We're on a steep hill. There's no buildings, no houses, no nothing around, probably for miles. I couldn't see anywhere. No trees, no nothing. Where am I going to find a board? Well, whatever. We started looking, and sure enough, by golly, found one. Only about 50 feet or so from the Jeep. So, placed it on the mud, put the jack on top of it, and my theory worked. As the jack went up, the Jeep went up, and I did exactly what I said, ended up driving off the jack, and it did that for about 10 feet or so, maybe a little more, and whatever it took to get off out of the mud. Once we got out of the mud, and about 2 hours or so have passed while we're doing all this, and that's just a guess, I don't remember. Once we got out of the mud, I noticed that my right rear tire was flat. And I just assumed that it must have gone down on a sharp rock or something. No big deal. I've had flat tires before. You just jack the Jeep up one more time, undo all those lug nuts, and the military Jeep had a lot of them. So I had a 4-way lug wrench. Took the end that fit, put it on a lug nut, started twisting. No budge. Didn't budge an inch. Didn't budge at all. Jerked, twisted, jerked. Finally, I tried all of the lug nuts. I couldn't get one of them to even turn a millisquidgen. So finally, and I was proud of my strength. I thought I was a pretty good boy. So anyway, put one end of the lug wrench on a nut. I held the other one with 2 hands, and I had my friend get up on the end of the lug wrench that stood out to the side, and I had him jump up and down on it, which he was doing. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. And as I said, a couple of hours had already passed. We worked on those lug nuts for another couple. We'd been there most of the day. It was pouring rain. Well, it wasn't pouring, it was drizzling. And anyway, I walked around the front of the Jeep. Bumper stood out from the grill about a foot and a half to accommodate a winch, which I didn't have. I just flopped my butt down on that cast iron bumper and said, "Oh God, what am I supposed to do now?" About that moment, 2 men appeared from the right. They're sailors dressed in dungarees. One of them said, "What's the problem?" I told them. They said, "Oh, mind if I try?" Now, I almost laughed, because this guy was much smaller than I was. I knew he wasn't anywhere near as strong as I was. But I didn't laugh. I just handed him the wrench and I said, "Knock yourself loose." He went round the side, and I was still sitting on the bumper. I didn't pay any attention. About a minute later, he had that rear tire off and my spare tire on. He had undone all those lug nuts, and I don't know how many there are, but on the military Jeep, back then anyway, there was quite a few of them. I said, "How did you do that?" He just laughed. He said, "I used to work in the pit crew at the Indy 500. I said, "Oh." Just like that was the most natural thing in the world, that some dummy stuck on the side of a mountain in an out-of-the-way area in Iceland should just happen to have somebody walk by, strolling out for a stroll in the rain, who worked in the pit crew at the Indy 500. Anyway, I thanked him profusely, and they left. They took off, going the same direction they were going, heading to my left. I turned around and said something to my buddy, and then I turned around to say something again to them, probably thank you again, and there was nobody there. I thought, where in the world did they go? Because there was no place for them to go. We're on a hill. There's no trees, there's no buildings, there's no place to hide. There was no cliffs, no drop-off for them to disappear over. Where did they go? It didn't strike me that odd at the time. I thought, well, they must have gone somewhere. And got back in the Jeep, drove down the hill. Still raining. We're soaking wet. It's cold. Well, when you're wet, anything is cold. Started fishing because we needed to eat, and it was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I do remember that, 4:30, somewhere around in there. Maybe even later. We caught one trout, about 6 inches long. That's all we got. I cooked that dude. I don't know how I made a fire. but I did. Probably out of the board I used in the mud. I learned a long time ago how to start a fire with wet wood. You cut little tiny slivers off and you get them going. But anyway, that's another story. That was the best tasting trout I've ever eaten in my entire life. Rained all night. The rain, we were stuck in a shepherd's hut. It was a little triangle thing, stood about 3-4 foot high. We spent the night in that thing. Rain, mud running through the shepherd's hut. Anyway, next morning we got up and headed for there was a small naval base right there on the lake. We went there, had breakfast, and then headed for home. Story doesn't end there. Years later, about 1990, I had remarried. My wife Sylvia was a writer, and she and I used to write together in the mornings. And she was writing fiction, and I was writing essentially memoirs. Never did anything with them. Wrote a bunch of them. I wrote this story, and in those days, in 1990, computers weren't as sophisticated as they are now. We used a system called DOS, and we saved everything to floppy disks. And I think a floppy disk, and if I remember correctly, and I may be wrong, it seemed to me they held about 4 megabytes. That's it. That was your memory. This computer I have off to my right here, actually it's right in front of me, it holds a terabyte. So anyway, next morning I went upstairs, cranked up the computer, put the disk in, went to open the file to do some editing. No file. I said, okay, well, I'll just retype it. I must have done something wrong. So I retyped it. Took about an hour. Filed the disk, went downstairs, went to work. I had a cabinet shop down below, office upstairs. Worked all day. Next morning, went down, cranked up the computer, put in the disk. No file. Now this time I'm angry. I was miffed the day before, but now I'm angry. Started retyping. And this is never a good sign because I was getting bored with the story. I wanted to move on to something else. Retyped it. Saved the disk, but this time I didn't shut down the computer. Saved the file, then reopened it up again immediately. File was there. And as I was looking at it, there towards the end of the story, which was only a page or two long, suddenly one line just seemed to appear about an inch, just elevated itself about an inch above the sheet of paper. And it was in bold print. And it started out, as God is my witness, this is a true, everything I've written is true. And I heard a voice in my mind at the same time, and it said, if you're going to say, as God is my witness, get it right. Well, in that story, and I knew immediately where it was, in that story I said that I was miles off the highway, main highway. And that wasn't true. I might have been 100 yards, 100 feet to 100 yards off the road. I was using hyperbole to make the point that I was miles from any gas station or help. It really was, at least 15 or 20 miles. I amended that, saved it, closed it out, and never lost it again. Well, that's my story. I hope you enjoyed it. I guess this is my second fishing tale, isn't it? Yeah, hope you enjoyed it. Bye-bye.